Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 1. Get your scuba gear, because we're about to go deep sea diving. Now, according to the Alphabet Boys, here's the descriptions of the sovereign citizens. It says, sovereign citizens are anti-government extremists who believe that even though they physically reside in this country, they are separate or sovereign from the United States. So let's unpack two things. First, let's deal with the term sovereign citizen. Second, let's define what a sovereign really is. Book reference. The term sovereign citizen is foremost an oxymoron. A sovereign by definition means one in which independent and supreme authority is invested, and a citizen is one who is in a subordinate or subject to status. The term is akin to calling one a king's subject. Spearheaded and coined by the FBI, the term sovereign citizen was implemented as a means to illegitimize and deter people from learning and enforcing their rights. Let's see what sovereign means at law. Sovereign. A person, body, or state in which independent and supreme authority is vested. Sovereign people, the political body consisting of the entire number of citizens and qualified electors who, in their collective capacity, possess the powers of sovereignty and exercise them through their chosen representatives. Notice, there is no definition for a sovereign citizen in the law dictionary. Now let's see what form of government was established here in this country. Article 4, Section 4, guarantees to the states. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. But let's see what Benjamin Franklin said. Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? A republic if you can keep it. The response is attributed to Benjamin Franklin at the close of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, when queried as he left Independence Hall on the final day of deliberation. So now let's go back to the Black's Law Dictionary and look up a republican form of government. Republican government, one in which the powers of sovereignty are vested in the people and are exercised by the people. But wait, didn't the FBI say that people think they're sovereign? But check out this definition of subject, constitutional law, one that owes allegiance to a sovereign and is governed by his laws. Men in free governments are subjects as well as citizens. As citizens, they enjoy rights and franchises. As subjects, they are bound to obey the laws, which is why they want people to be subject. The term is little used in this sense in countries enjoying a what? A republican form of government. So the people aren't supposed to be subject to the United States government. Subject to means liable, subordinate, subservient, and inferior, obedient to, governed, or affected by. Book reference. In this country, the sovereignty of the individual states is subordinate both to the citizenry of each state and to the supreme law of the federal sovereign. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 2. Let's go. So back to reading what the FBI said. Sovereign citizens are anti-government extremists who believe that even though they physically reside in this country, they are separate or sovereign from the United States. So in this video, we're going to break down separate and sovereign from the United States. And we're also going to break down the anti-government extremist label. Book reference. There is no such thing as a power of inherent sovereignty in the government of the United States. In this country, sovereignty resides with the people, and Congress can exercise no power which they have not, by their constitution entrusted to it. All else is withheld. Juliet versus Greenman. The sovereignty of a state does not reside in the persons who fill the different departments of its government, but in the people from whom the government emanated, and they may change it at their discretion. Sovereignty then in this country abides with the constituency and not with the agent, and this remark is true both in reference to the federal and state government. Spooner versus McConnell. So those two cases alone are enough to rebut the narrative that people think they are sovereign and separate from the United States, which the people are. Now to address the anti-government extremist BS propaganda label. As previously mentioned, the term sovereign citizen is an oxymoronic label created by the FBI to group common people who hold pretending government officials to constitutional standards into the category of domestic terrorists. There is no legal or regular definition of the term sovereign citizen, and the majority of the people who are mislabeled as such don't even refer to themselves as sovereign citizens. We fucking hate the term sovereign citizens, emphasis added. One can look to the origins of the United States for examples of extremism. In the eyes of the British monarch, King George III, the European founding fathers would undoubtedly be labeled extremists or today's sovereign citizens, as they too fought against many of the same oppressive mechanisms we fight against today. One of the foundational documents of the United States, being the Declaration of Independence, is essentially a criminal complaint against the British king. By the logic of the modern anti-sovereigns, they would label such a document as terrorist papers, anti-government, etc. According to anti-sovereign logic, the quote, "Give me liberty or give me death" by one Thomas Paine today would undoubtedly land him on the extremist or domestic terrorist list. The issue is that we are anti-corrupt and anti-de facto government. And if you go do some research on any of the founding fathers, they actually spoke against everything that's happening today. The spirit of resistance to government is so valuable on certain occasions that I wish it always be kept alive. That was Thomas Jefferson. Stay tuned for part 3 because it's only getting better. If you want to get my book, it's available on Amazon. The link is in the bio. Please like, share, and comment your thoughts. Peace. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 3. This one gonna be real good. Going back to the Alphabet Boys' description of so-called sovereign citizen, they say, as a result, they believe they don't have to answer to any government authority, including courts, taxing entities, motor vehicles, or law enforcement. In this video, we're focusing on taxes and taxing entities. So to begin, we're going to go to the Constitution to see who has the power to lay taxes. In Article 1, Section 8, it says, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense, and blah, blah, blah. Now, if you look at the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution, you're not going to see Internal Revenue Service. However, the Internal Revenue Service are the ones who are collecting taxes today. Next, we're going to go to this 1880s case, the Supreme Court case, Stone versus Mississippi. Let's see what they say. While taxation is, in general, necessary for the support of government, it is not part of the government itself. Government was not organized for the purposes of taxation, but taxation may be necessary for the purpose of government. As such, taxation becomes an incident to the exercise of the legitimate functions of government, but nothing more. No government dependent on taxation for support can bargain away its whole power of taxation, for that would be substantially abdication. So let's look at what the word abdication means. Book reference. The act of a sovereign in renouncing and relinquishing his government or throne, so that either the throne is left entirely vacant or is filled by a successor appointed or elected beforehand. I hope y'all caught that and see what's going on. Congress relinquished its sovereign power, which was given to it by the people per the Constitution. They relinquished their sovereign powers of government to the taxing authority that is now called the IRS. But let's look up some quotes on taxation. A government which robs Peter to pay Paul can always depend on the support of Paul. In other words, a democratic government is the only one in which those who vote for a tax can escape the obligation to pay it. The power to tax is the power to destroy. Book reference. The revenue laws relate to taxpayers and not to non-taxpayers. The latter are without their scope. No procedure is prescribed for non-taxpayers. Now let's get into what their law and their code say about taxation. At 26 CFR section 601.602, it states, the tax system is based on voluntary compliance. 26 CFR 31.3402 says voluntary withholding agreements. In the Supreme Court case Flora versus United States in 1960, it was said that our system of taxation is based upon voluntary assessment and payment, not upon distraint, which is a lie. So they conveniently leave out all this information when they say this stuff. Part 4 coming tomorrow, so stay tuned. Peace. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 4. Video, we're going to be addressing the motor vehicle department section and whether the people have the right to travel or not, and should the people be listening to the motor vehicle department and the so-called law enforcement. Book reference. Here's the main thing they would like to say. Sovereign citizens believe they are not required to have driver's licenses, license plates, or vehicle registration. They like to get into roadside arguments with police on their quote-unquote right to travel. Here's what the courts say. The right to travel, the right to motor conveyance, the right to locomotion are all absolute rights, and the police cannot make void of the exercise of rights. States versus Armstead. To combat a portion of their baseless propaganda, let's conduct a line-by-line critical analysis of the following case citation in an exercise of critical thinking and deductive reasoning. Free movement by the citizen is of course as dangerous to a tyrant as free expression of ideas or the right of assembly, and it is therefore controlled in most countries in the interest of security. That is why riding boxcars carries extreme penalties in communist lands. That is why the ticketing of people and the use of identification papers are routine matters under totalitarian regimes, yet abhorred in the United States. Aptheker versus Secretary of State. Now pay close attention to this breakdown. Line 1. Free movement by the citizen is of course as dangerous to a tyrant. From this statement, we can deduce that a tyrant doesn't necessarily like free movement by people, and he or she views it as dangerous. This free movement is the right to travel that anti-sovereigns accuse sovereign advocates of misinterpreting, having baseless arguments regarding the right to travel, or flat out wrong about all things pertaining to the right to travel. Line 2. In it, freedom of movement is therefore controlled in most countries in the interest of security. This statement shows that tyrants control the people's freedom of movement under the auspices of it being in the interest of security. In American law, this doctrine of controlling or regulating or converting private rights into state-sanctioned privileges, such as the right to travel or freedom of movement, is called police powers. Those that can give up essential liberty to gain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety, and that's a quote by Benjamin Franklin. Line 3. That is why the ticketing of people and the use of identification papers are routine matters under totalitarian regimes, yet abhorred in the United States. In this sentence, we can see that under totalitarian regimes, the ticketing of people and use of identification papers are everyday occurrences. Although it says, yet abhorred in the United States, on basic questioning, we can prove that to be false. 1. Do police routinely ticket people every day? Do police routinely ask for identification papers when they ask people for license and registration? So based on the everyday behavior of police, we can deduce that they indeed act as if we're under a tyrannical/totalitarian regime. Get this book. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 5. Now this video is a continuation of part 4 dealing with the right to travel. Because again, they like to say, as a result, they believe they don't have to answer to any government authority, including courts, taxing entities, motor vehicle departments, or law enforcement. But I want to expound on something I read in this book in the last video. This statement shows that tyrants control the people's freedom of movement under the auspices of it being in the interest of security. In American law, this doctrine of controlling or regulating or converting private rights into state-sanctioned privileges, such as the right to travel or freedom of movement, is called police powers. So I'm going to explain what police powers are, because when you initially hear it, you're thinking about the everyday policeman rolling around, but that's not what it is. So this is from American jurisprudence dealing with licenses and permits. A state's police power with regards to protection of the health, morals, and welfare of the public includes by implication the right to regulate by requiring a license as a prerequisite to the carrying on of certain activities, commonly designated as businesses, occupations, professions, vocations, trades, or callings. States have a compelling interest in the regulation of the practice of professions within their boundaries, and this regulatory power is generally limited to activities carried on within the state, and is restricted to those activities and occupations to which the states afford some measure of protection and support. But what that's saying is that the police powers regulate all things pertaining to business within the state. And so the problem becomes people think they're driving, and driving is a commercial activity. So what they don't tell you about is your right to travel. See, what they're doing is they're converting your right to travel under the auspices of it being driving. So let's look up driver in a law dictionary. One employed in conducting or operating a coach, carriage, wagon, or other vehicle with horses, mules, or other animals, or a bicycle, tricycle, or motor car, though not a street railroad car. So a driver is somebody who's employed or operates a motor vehicle for profit or gain. So somebody like a Lyft driver or Uber driver, those are the people that's required to have a driver's license. Driving is a privilege, not a right. The Oklahoma state government regulates the activity of driving on the state's highways in the interest of public safety and general welfare. So if you have a driver's license, you are presumed to be operating your motor vehicle for profit or gain, which is why you have to follow all the rules and regulations. And here's proof. State license according to the Oklahoma statutes. State license means a license, certificate, registration, permit, approval, or other similar document issued by a licensing entity, which would be the motor vehicle department, to an individual or business, a right or privilege to engage in a profession, occupation, or business in this state. So if you're not doing business, why do we even need a license? Stay tuned for part 6. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 6. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down whether the people have to listen to so-called law enforcement. Quick disclaimer, before I go any further, this video is not to encourage people to be belligerent towards police or anything anti-police. So use your discretion, please. Book reference. Now let's look at the hierarchy of authority. At the top, you have God, which is the supreme ruler. He creates man and delegates authority to man. See Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. Man receives his authority from God, creates government, and grants government powers. See the Constitution and Article 1, Section 1, the powers granted to Congress. Also see the Declaration of Independence. The government, which is created by man, creates subjects, citizens, and persons subject to his jurisdiction. See Act of Congress 1871 and the 14th Amendment, Section 1. Persons, citizens, and residents are subject to corporate statutes, rules, policies, and acts of Congress. They are granted privileges, aka civil rights. The derivative power cannot be greater than the original from which it is derived. Now, based off that power structure alone, the answer to the question of whether the people have to listen to law enforcement was answered. But let's read a little bit further and go over some common sense questions. Question number 6. If you have a child, is that child subordinate to you, or does he or she have supremacy over you? Question number 7. Likewise, if public servants are elected by the people, why do the people let the servants tell them what to do and make laws for them to follow? Would you let your child make the rules in your household for you to follow? Question 8. Does the employer ask the employee for a raise, or is it the employee who gets compensation and a raise from the employer? Question 9. If the taxes of the people pay the salaries of the public servants and officials, who has the real power? Sovereignty case law. Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and source of law. But in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people, by whom and for whom all government exists and acts. And the law is the definition and limitation of power. Critical thinking time. So if the people are sovereign, why would they give up their sovereignty to hire public officials to make laws to tell them what to do? Would any reasonable person hire somebody to tell them what to do? Strictly speaking, in our Republican form of government, the absolute sovereignty of the nation is in the people of the nation, and the residuary sovereignty of each state, not granted to any of its public functionaries, is in the people of the state. The people, or sovereign, are not bound by general words and statutes, restrictive of prerogative rights, title, or interest, unless expressly named. But again, it's up to you to decide who you want to listen to. Stay tuned for part 7. Like and comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. Peace. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 7. So a lot of times when you start to use case law, a lot of people, and mainly attorneys, are going to be accusing you of misinterpreting case law or what the case citations say. So in this video, I'm going to read strictly from case law and let you decide if any of this can be misinterpreted. Book reference. Sovereignty case law. In this country, the sovereignty of the individual states is subordinate both to the citizenry of each state and to the supreme law of the federal sovereign, and that's from Seminole Tribe of Florida versus Florida. In a republic where the people are sovereign, the ability of the citizenry to make informed choices among candidates for office is essential, for the identities of those who are elected will inevitably shape the course that we follow as a nation. That's Buckley versus Vallejo, Supreme Court case 1976. In our country, the people are sovereign, and the government cannot sever its relationship to the people by taking away their citizenship. Our Constitution governs us, and we must never forget that our Constitution limits the government to those powers specifically granted or those that are necessary and proper to carry out the specifically granted ones. Afroyim versus Rusk. The people who created this government endowed it with broad powers. They created a sovereign state with power to function as sovereignty. But the citizens themselves are sovereign, and their citizenship is not subject to the general powers of their government. Perez versus Brownell. Allegiance imports an obligation on a citizen or subject, the correlative right to which resides in the sovereign power. Allegiance in this country is not due to Congress, but to the people, with whom the sovereign power is found. It is, therefore, by the people only that any alteration can be made of the existing institutions with respect to allegiance. Afroyim versus Rusk. Under our Constitution, it is we the people who are sovereign. The people have the final say. United States versus Automobile Workers. Under our system, the people, who are there called subjects, and that's speaking about another country in this case, are the sovereign. United States versus Lee. When the revolution took place, the people of each state became themselves sovereign, and in that character hold the absolute right to all the navigable waters and the soils under them, for their own common use, subject only to the rights since surrendered by the Constitution to the general government, Shively versus Bobley. In enjoining the enforcement of the federal regulation in number 73-1265, Judge Gazelle did not vindicate any rights of the Washington Post, but rather the right of the people, the true sovereign under our constitutional scheme, to govern in an informed manner. Pell versus Pecuniae. Stay tuned for part 8, because in part 8 we're just going to continue to read more sovereignty case law. Peace. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 8. Let's get it. Book reference. Sovereignty case law. In Missouri, the people are sovereign. The immunity is theirs. By adoption of our Constitution, the people of Missouri assented to be governed and establish the terms of the grant. They authorized the creation of governmental entities for the performance of tasks considered essential to their general welfare. In our view, in order that such entities remain viable, it must be recognized that the immunity of the sovereign people must pass to those governmental entities which serve the public interest. Jones v. State of Highway, as in the Missouri Supreme Court case. The people of every sovereign state possess all the rights and powers of government. The people of these states, in forming a more perfect union to ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense, have vested the power of making and carrying on war in the general government, reserving to the states, respectively, only the right to repel invasions and suppress insurrection of such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. This right and power, thus granted to the general government, is in its nature entirely executive, and in the absence of constitutional limitations will be wholly lodged in the President as Chief Executive and Commander-in-Chief of the armies and navies. But the power of governing is a trust committed by the people to the government, no part of which can be granted away. The people, in their sovereign capacity, have established their agencies for the preservation of the public health and the public morals, and the protection of public and private right. These several agencies can govern according to their discretion if within the scope of their general authority while in power, but they cannot give away nor sell the discretion of those that are to come after them, in respect to the matters of government, of which, from the very nature of things, must vary with varying circumstances. They may create corporations and give them, so to speak, a limited citizenship, but as citizens, limited in their privileges or otherwise, these creatures of the government creation are subject to such rules and regulations as may from time to time be ordained and established for the preservation of health and morality. Stone versus Mississippi. Now let's go back to a certain part of that case. They may create corporations and give them, so to speak, a limited citizenship, but as citizens limited in their privileges or otherwise, these creatures of the government creation are subject to such rules and regulations as may from time to time be ordained and established for the preservation of health and morality. So let's see what that citizenship is defined as in law. Corporate citizenship, corporate status in the state of incorporation. And that's your 14th Amendment citizenship that enslaves everyone. Stay tuned for part 9. Peace. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 9. Book reference. So we're going to continue reading sovereignty case law. Since in common usage the term person does not include the sovereign, statutes not employing the phrase are ordinarily construed to exclude it. That's in the United States versus Cooper Corporation. Now let's read that again and break that down. The term person does not include the sovereign. Statutes not employing the phrase are ordinarily construed to exclude it. So let's connect the dots. Number 1, who's the sovereign? In our country, the people are sovereign. In a republic where the people are sovereign, under our Constitution, it is we the people who are sovereign. So we got our answer there. Now let's go back to the original case and read it one more time for clarification. Since in common usage the term person does not include the sovereign, statutes not employing the phrase are ordinarily construed to exclude it. So now let's break down the term person. In law, and in harmony with the plain meaning rule, the word person for purpose of statutory construction, unless the context indicates to the contrary, is normally construed to include corporations, companies, associations, firms, partnerships, societies, and joint stock companies, as well as individuals. And you can find that in Wilson versus Omaha Tribe. So what that means in law, when you see the word person defined in statutory construction or in the statutory definitions section, it's normally meaning the corporations and all those other things that I just listed. But let's look at what the word statute mean in this dictionary right here. Statute, a law or rule of a guild or a corporation. So the trick is that they're listing you or getting you to be surety for a person, a citizen, or a resident of a corporation, which puts you under the status of a corporate citizen. Corporate citizenship, corporate status in a state of incorporation. So when we look at the hierarchy of authority, government creates subjects, citizens, and persons subject to its jurisdiction, which residents and citizens and persons are subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. government. And this is from an old newspaper that was printed in 1905. It will be seen at once that the 14th Amendment, while retaining state citizenship, at the same time created a new citizenship, federal citizenship. And this federal citizenship was placed in dignity and importance above state citizenship. In reading number 2, the court today holds that the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment has no application to Bellier. While conceding that Bellier is an American citizen, the majority states he simply is not a 14th Amendment first sentence citizen. So that's why it's important to learn legal terminology, because the word person and being a 14th Amendment citizen, you are now classified as their corporate property or your corporate citizen, which is why you have to follow everything they say. Stay tuned to part 10. Peace. Rebuttal to the term sovereign citizen, part 10. Book reference. Sovereignty case law. Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to the law, for it is the author and source of law. But in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people, by whom and for whom all government exists and acts. And the law is the definition and limitation or power. Yickwo versus Hopkins. There is no such thing as a power of inherent sovereignty in the government of the United States. In this country, sovereignty resides in the people, and Congress can exercise no power which they have not, by their constitution entrusted to it. All else is withheld. Juilliard versus Greenman. The people of the state, as successor of its former sovereign, are entitled to all the rights which formerly belonged to the king by his prerogative. Through the medium of their legislator, they may exercise all the powers which previously to the Revolution could have been exercised either by the king alone or by him in conjunction with his parliament, subject only to those restrictions which have been imposed by the Constitution of this state or of the United States. Lansing versus Smith. Strictly speaking, in our Republican form of government, the absolute sovereignty of the nation is in the people of the nation, and the residuary sovereignty of each state not granted to any of its public functionaries is in the people of the state. The sovereignty of a state does not reside in the persons who fill the different departments of its government, but in the people from whom the government emanated, and they may change it at their discretion. Sovereignty then in this country abides with the constituency, and not with the agent, and this remark is true both in reference to the federal and state government. Spooner versus McConnell. So I hope you get the picture by now that sovereignty resides with you when you're in your proper status. So as a 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, you are held as a subject, ward/slave status. So if you want to learn how government really works and how we got into this position today, go get this book on Amazon. Click the link in the bio and it will take you there to get this book if you want to be better protected from mayhem, aka the U.S. government. Peace. Thank you and I love you.